Hello YouTube. Today I'll be showing you an updated Abyss guide with magic training. I know a lot of you know about this method, but I'm going to explain it for those who do not. You can click the skip button to skip for the next section. Abyss is located in the level 5 wilderness after tallying from the Zamorak Mage. You can get to this area from the north of the Edgevale Lodestone or from the Grand Exchange shortcut, and then you'll see a Zamorak Mage at the end of the river. I know it's only level 5 wilderness, but you still gotta be aware of PKers just in case. I cannot stress this enough really. You must complete the Abyss mini quests before you enter. The other requirements for this method are you need Desert Treasure quests complete, and you must be on Ancient Spellbooks. I would also suggest you have at least 70 magic before you start this method. 92 prayer also helps, but it's not really needed for the most part, so don't worry about it. Additionally, I would recommend using the mage version of the Dorth Cannon called the Oldak Coil. The blueprint requires at least 70 invention before you can unlock the craft. Don't panic if you don't have access to it because it's still a viable method, with or without the cannon. For my equipment setup, I have a Staff of Light. The reason I use a tier 75 staff is because, well, for one thing, the damage of your spell is equal to your spell's tier or your weapon's tier, whichever one's lower. So in this case, burst spells only scale up to tier 75 damage. However, because Abyss creatures have very low HP, you don't really need a higher tier weapon. Either way, I wouldn't really advise you risk your Nox staff getting there. And Staff of Light's also non-degradable, and you can also save runes as well. If you're going to augment a staff and then dismantle it, then I would suggest like Polypore or Crystal Staff, as it's usually cheaper than Staff of Light. I actually did test it with a dual wield setup, and it's actually 25k more XP per hour, but the amount of runes you consume is really absurd, so I wouldn't recommend it at all. Subjugation armor works just fine, although if you have the new tier 80 God Wars Dungeon 2 armors, you can also use that here since it doesn't degrade either. The amulet I'm using is Zealots. This is because with Ancient Leech Curses, it offers more DPS and also drains less prayer than Torment. If you're gonna go full AFK though, I may suggest you switch to a Blood Necklace shard instead. These things are somewhat cheap, so yeah. You don't really need augmented gear here, as you don't really need extra DPS from its perks. If you need Invention XP for this, then yeah, of course use augmented gear. But the best perks I would suggest to use are Efficient, Enlighten, and Scavenging perk. There's not really a lot of good perks that are really useful here anyways. The aura I'm using is Vampirism. As you can see, my HP is hardly going down because the AoE is quite amazing here. You can use Penance if it's on cooldown, but honestly it doesn't really matter. Some of you might not know about the God Book, but nowadays you can put it in your pocket slot. It offers a very small damage bonus and some prayer bonus as well. I'm using a non-degradable version of it, so don't worry about it. Surgeon's Ring and Max Cape, yeah, self-explanatory, just use whatever ring or cape you want. For my inventory setup, I have Holy Overloads. Basically a combination of overloads and prayer renewals. I also brought a couple of prayer potions, but you don't really need that much if you're going to use Vampirism aura, since I don't really use Soul Split here. I would bring around 10 or so if you're not using Vamp aura though. For aggression potions you don't need it at all, since these things, well, you can just renew your aggression every 10 minutes, just by running back and forth inside the Abyss. Now there's a magic version of the Dorth Cannon called Oldak Coil as I mentioned earlier. Basically it fires slower than a cannon. However, the amazing thing about this is, it has a multi-target AoE ability, unlike the regular cannon. And another cool thing is, it consumes fewer cannonballs per hour. You only need like 2,000 cannonballs instead of 5,000. You can craft this by using 2 rune bars, 150 metallic parts, 15 heavy components, and 15 imbued components. However, it's untradeable. But don't worry if you don't have this unlocked, because it's still a decent method without the cannon anyways, like I mentioned earlier. I'm just demonstrating it for those who have it unlocked. Enhanced Excalibur is good for additional healing if you want. I don't personally need food because of this, but bring some if you're lower level. Charming Imp is in my tool belt. I also carry around 4,000 earth and 1,000 death runes, which should last me a little over an hour. Now a lot of people use blood spells because they heal back damage, and they also do more damage than the shadow spells. Well, healing is good here, but it's not really needed, and I didn't even need a soul split once this hour, well mostly because of Vamp aura. And even if you don't have Soul Split or Vamp Aura, Blood Necklace should be enough healing. Although for the lower levels, I may suggest you use Blood Burst though. Damage is actually a little bit more from the auto attacks, but it's not really that much of a difference either. And so really, the main reason I use Shadow Bursts over Blood Bursts is because, well, Earth Runes are a lot cheaper than Fire Runes. Now I'm using Revolution instead of Legacy. Again, this is what most of you used before. Nowadays, Revolution and Legacy are kinda on par. Well, there's an ability called Corruption Blasts. Basically, it's permanently unlocked from a drop from raids, but don't worry if you can't do raids. You can also buy the Codex off the GE for like 11 mil. It basically spreads damage across Abyss creatures nearby. If for some reason you can't unlock Corruption Blasts, then maybe I would suggest you use Legacy instead. And again, it also consumes fewer runes, so you don't need to auto attack as much as Legacy. And it's also easier to escape PKers, since you got Anticipate and Freedom in case they stun you. So anyways, here's my ability bar for Revolution. The first slot is Corruption Blast, the second is for Dragon Breath, and the last is for Chain. Pretty much for the basic abilities, just put AoE or multi-target ones, and then leave the rest blank. It doesn't really matter which thresholds or ultimates you put in your Revolution boundary, since it doesn't auto-trigger them. The other thresholds or ultimates I would recommend here are Detonate, Sunshine, and Tsunami, but I haven't tested them using the abilities, since I'm really AFKing for the most part. Now for prayers, I'm using Leech Range Strength. I've said this in most of my combat guides that combined with Zealots, it actually does more damage than other amulets when comparing to Torment. Soul Split's optional, but you only need to use it like once every 2 minutes or so, but otherwise Enhanced Excalibur should heal some of it back. Some of you have Saren spells unlocked, but you don't need Dark Form here. The exact spot I'm standing is west and south part of the Abyss. I can't really explain exactly where it is, but as you can see, this is where I'm standing, basically. Now every 10 minutes you need to renew aggression, so just remember to run either northwest or straight east, whichever path you didn't run last. I have tested the eastern spot of the Abyss, and it's around 50k XP per hour slower. If you need a safe spot for hopping worlds, just use the very west-south spot. Alright, so let's talk about the Abyss lure. Now I know a lot of you have mentioned this many times, but people keep falling for the lure because nobody mentions it in any guide. So the way it works is, well, a random person is going to ask you to buy your Abyss spot, but because there's no safe spot to trade, the only option would have been to go inside the Abyss ring. Now you may think the other person will go in as well, but instead now you lost your spot. And now here's the interesting part where it comes into play. You can't go back to the outer ring without re-entering the Abyss. So the only way back is just by teleporting out, then coming back the normal way. However, someone else, most likely part of the luring group, will actually attempt to PK you, with you being scald and likely no prayer points. So if anyone asks you for their Abyss spot, just kindly refuse. If otherwise you need to leave the Abyss for whatever reason, then just make sure you have your private message turned off, and then have your clan chat turned off as well, and then just hop worlds first. So based on this test, I got 627k magic XP per hour. I also tested this without a cannon, and it's around 550k XP per hour. Using a Nox Staff with Barrage didn't make such a huge difference. I think it only increased the XP per hour by like 10k to 20k. I know it's obviously more, but it's pretty marginal for what it costs per hour, so I don't think it's ideal that you have to pay more bills for this, you know? Now all the XP rates are done without any multipliers, so it's just all flat rates. I can't give you a proper calculation for Invention, but let's say you were to siphon everything, right? It's around 500k XP per hour. Dismantling would be like twice as much, but I wouldn't really recommend it. As for charms, it's pretty amazing for green charms. It's around like 450 per hour, and around 150 gold charms per hour as well. Crimson charms, well, they're okay. They're not that bad. It's bad for blue charms though. Although I set my Charming Imp to destroy the charms, because yeah, I'm 200 mil summoning already, I got these rates from my Abyss Chaining guide. So the resources I consumed this hour were like 500 casts of Shadow Burst, and 2,000 cannonballs. Based on today's GE prices, it would cost you around 1.1 mil an hour. Although I didn't use the scavenging perk here, you can actually kill around like 3,000 Abyss monsters in an hour. On average, you'd get around 200 combat XP per kill. So with scavenging perk, you can pretty much expect like 270 uncommon materials an hour, and possibly one rare material each hour. It's really amazing compared to Saradomin Encampment. So how does this compare with Slayer? Well, at least for the lower levels of Slayer, it's really no match against the Abyss. At higher level Slayer creatures though, it's a lot faster than the Abyss. Abyssal Demons are at least 800k XP per hour because of aggression potions. Dark Beasts are also great as well. Muspels as well. So really, there's a lot of good Slayer creatures that are better than this method. And also not to mention that these Slayer creatures do offer a fair bit of profit, as well as more charms. Alright, so is this method worth doing overall? In my opinion, no, not really. Like I said, Slayer method is faster at higher levels. It also costs more money since you're consuming the runes, and the cannonballs as well. And I'm not even going to mention that it's still quite popular, as there will be hopping worlds for competition, you know, especially during the peak hours of the day. However, the really cool thing about it is it's extremely AFK, as you can see, and the charms are quite good for greens. Other than that, however, I wouldn't really recommend it. So yeah, thanks for watching and I hope it helps. If I missed anything, feel free to ask.